Here is the completed travel journal for Spain. The notebook that I brought is by Sterling Ink, and it is a B6 Slim with exactly 64 pages. And as you can see, I ended up filling every single page with my memories and photos and recollections, and I can't wait to share them with you. On the cover, I also added this beautiful wax stamp of a poppy. Since we went in May, we saw lots of poppies all along the way, and so I thought that was a very fitting stamp to add onto the cover of my journal to represent the experience. And as you can see behind my journal, I have my credencial all filled out with the many stamps I collected along the way. Now, when you open the journal, the first page you come upon is an index of all of the places that we went with the page numbers that you can find them on as you're going through the journal. Of course, it also has a title for Spain and the dates that we went. I always like to do a title page to introduce the place that I am visiting, and I found doing an index really helpful for this type of trip where I was in a new location every single day. So that might be something to consider for your own travel journal if you also are planning a trip where you are going to be in several locations. And then here on the left side, I actually have a fold out of one of my certificates from Santiago de Compostela. In this case, the certificate includes the kilometers that we walked, which was 315, starting in León, as well as the date that we finished. And I wanted to get two certificates so that I could include one in my journal, and then I have the other one here, and that is going to be one that I frame and hang on my wall. We then go right into our travel experience, starting with our flight on May 10th, in which case I just documented that experience with a copy of my ticket. And then bienvenidos a Madrid, because we arrived on May 11th in the morning. We stayed at a great hostel called The Hat, and so I just did a little version of their logo over a swatch of yellow highlighter. You are going to see this same color again and again throughout the travel journal because I purposefully brought just that one highlighter for a pop of color, because that yellow is what they use for all of the arrows on the Camino, and so it's kind of the official color of the Camino and made a lot of sense to use as the pop of color throughout this journal. The other thing you're going to see me use again and again are these great little date stamps. I do have them linked in my Amazon storefront, so you can check those out in the description, along with any of the other supplies that I mentioned. Since we had a red-eye flight, we essentially had this whole day in Madrid, and there were a few things that I wanted to make sure I did, including getting to see the Royal Palace, which I have this wonderful sticker down here of the Royal Palace that I got from the washi tape shop in their Spain washi tape, which proved so helpful for documenting this trip. And then here you see my first watercolor illustration, because in my art kit I did bring this mini watercolor palette, and I was actually pretty amazed by how well this worked and how much I enjoyed having it with me and using it to document my experience and do illustrations all along the way. And my only complaint with it is that it did not come with a red, and that actually proved very difficult because I realized as I was illustrating that there were a lot of things I wanted to be red or I wanted to be purple, but I couldn't blend colors not having a red to make that color. I did try to add a red in here, but it dried up and did not work. And so you'll see how I solved that problem along the way, but I was very excited on day one to document my first Spanish experience of having churros con chocolate, which, fun fact, is actually an item that I put on a bucket list I created when I was probably 16 years old, and so it was very exciting to be in Spain and officially checking off my churros con chocolate experience. And then here in this box, I listed a few of the other places we visited on a little self-guided walking tour. And then of course, throughout the pages of this journal, you will see lots of writing because this is a travel journal, not just a scrapbook. It's important to me to also document through my own words what I experienced. And then one thing you'll notice as we flip through is all of my photos are essentially a 4x6 collage of photos for that day. Sometimes I have one collage, sometimes I have two, and this method worked astoundingly well for me. All I did was create my journaling and my creative bits, and then I would leave a page blank in my journal and just write photos so that I knew when I get home, I'm going to make a collage and print out all of the photos for that day in a collage to paste into that page. And that's what I did. I got home, made all of my collages, and then pasted them in. The only thing I would probably change is it would be helpful if I made my collages while I was traveling so that they were all ready to go by the time I got home. The next day, we took a train from Madrid to León, and we had breakfast at the Hat after a very restless night. Goodness, an open window in the city is a terrible idea. It was so loud, and apparently they pick up the trash at midnight. Nevertheless, I was excited to get on the speed train to León and try to do a little journaling, though it was a bit too bumpy to write. And as you can see, for this day, I actually forgot to leave a blank page for the photos. So what I did is I made 2 collages because I had so many photos from this day, and I taped them back to back and then just tipped it into the gutter of the journal so that it essentially adds an additional page of just the photos, and that worked out really nicely. Another feature of this page is I kept my cathedral ticket and a little piece of my train ticket and just pasted those in here. I'm always trying to hold on to those little pieces of ephemera because it really helps to bring the memories to life. And then you'll also notice throughout my journal that I try, when possible, to put the same stamps that I am putting into my credencial into the journal itself. And then we have our first day of walking. And one thing I tried to do on every entry for my walking days is put the distance that I went according to my watch, and then also the number of steps and our destination. So in this case, we were walking from León to Hospital de Orbigo, and we walked 18.93 miles and 39,000 steps. So this was a very long first day, and I think caught some of the students and maybe some of the other staff off guard by just how much walking we would be doing. But as somebody who backpacks, I was familiar with the intensity. Here also are 2 more examples of some watercolor illustrations that I did. I have here a stork because I was very surprised that Spain apparently is the stork capital of the world. Not literally, but I was surprised that storks were so common. They seem to make their nest on top of all of the cathedrals along the way. And then when we arrived in Hospital de Orbigo, we came across this gorgeous 13th century bridge that was 200 meters long. So it's just this giant bridge from like the 1200s, again, just stretching across the river. And it was definitely a sight to behold and made you really feel like, wow, I am walking through history. And here is a photo of that bridge and also some of the flowers that we saw and a picture of one of my many bunk beds that I slept in throughout this experience. The next day we walked to Astorga, 15 miles or about 32,000 steps. This I cannot claim as my own art. This is a beautiful illustration from the washi tape shop. I used a lot of their watercolors in here because they really represented the landscape well. And so I had brought some of their stickers in my travel journal kit. I did draw some of my own poppies, and you might be wondering, how did you make them red if you didn't have your red paint with you? The albergue we stayed at this night actually had some colored pencils nearby, and so I used those to do the poppies. And at the end of the trip, I bought a tiny little pack of colored pencils and used those to go back and fill in any of the other red details. And here is a continuation of Astorga. They are famous for their chocolate, and so I have some photos here of chocolate that I cut out from the museum's brochure that I got. And then I also have this napkin from a place that we went to eat and had paella for the first time in Spain. And then over here I have a collage of some of the places we saw along the way, including this really neat place called the Oasis, where they offer this beautiful rest spot with tons of food and drinks, and it's all there for pilgrims and is free, though donations are encouraged. And then one of my favorite parts of this day was actually sitting in front of the fireplace in our albergue. We got some charcuterie from the grocery store and a bottle of wine and just enjoyed some time hanging out in the evening, and I was doing some journaling there by the fire, and it was just a very restful experience after a long day of walking. The next day was to Rabanal, and we walked 14 miles, or about 29,000 steps. And we were celebrating one of our students' birthdays, and so we had a dinner all together, and we got her a cake and made her a card, and she was very appreciative, and it was a very sweet occasion. On this day, we also went to the monastery in Rabanal and had this amazing pilgrims mass where we got to hear them chanting in Latin. And what was neat about it is they provided this hymn sheet for us so that we could follow along in English with what they were saying. And so it was a very powerful experience to hear the chanting in Latin and then to know what exactly they were saying as they were just speaking to God and praising Him. And then I have another photo collage of this day with the albergue that we stayed at and some of the sights along the way, including more wildflowers, a rainbow, and some beautiful cafes. This day was probably one of my all-time favorites on the entire trip. It was such a beautiful and special day walking to Malina Seca. This illustration, again, from the washi tape shop, which I do have a discount code in the description if you're interested, honestly represents the views so perfectly. Just the amazing wildflowers, the cutest little village tucked into a valley. It was breathtaking. As I say here, with the breathtaking view. This sticker is one from the Travel Diaries sticker kit available on my Patreon, and I use quite a few of those throughout these pages as well. And then, of course, you see some larger photos in this collage of just the spectacular views and the Cruz de Ferro, which is the highest point on the Camino, and it is this little cross atop this large pole, and at the base of it, there's just this pile of stones because it is tradition to bring a stone with you from home and carry it up to this point, and then leave the stone there to symbolically lay down your burdens. And so that is what I did. I carried this stone with me to represent my burdens and laid it down at the Cruz de Ferro. And here is actually the stamp, and you can see it here on my credencial as well, that I got at the Cruz de Ferro. There was this really neat artist who was right by the cross and giving out stamps with this beautiful ombre color, and it was definitely my favorite stamp of the journey. And I just did this little illustration of the cross with the words, "Lay down your burdens," atop the rock pile there. And then on this side, you see a collage of this really neat experience in which we got to be involved in a parade that we were not expecting when we arrived in Malina Seca. And then when you turn the page, you see a little bit more about that experience. And one thing I really like to do in my creative journaling, especially for travel journaling when I have a lot of writing, is I want to call out specific moments by hand lettering them in a bigger font and really making them a moment on the page so that without even reading, I remember the main highlight of the experience. And in this case, the highlight was a meat tasting that we went to at this amazing restaurant, and the surprise parade, which was in honor of San Isidro, which is their patron saint of farming. The next day was considered our rest day after 4 full days of walking to kind of give us a little bit of acclimation, but we still walked 10 miles on this day, and I ultimately had 21,000 steps, so still much more than a normal day back home. And on this day, we arrived in Ponferrada and essentially had the entire afternoon to explore. We had this really idyllic Spanish holiday experience of sitting in front of the gorgeous castle in this little cafe, drinking a cappuccino. It was so special. And then later in the day, we actually did a tour of the castle, which is from the Knights Templar time. And so we got this incredible tour of the castle, and then also went to a pilgrims mass here as well at their church. And all of the pilgrims were given this little card with a prayer on the back, which was a sweet little gift. And then I also saved this page for another collage because I knew I had a lot of photos from just the castle itself. The next day we walked to Villafranca, and that was 17 miles or about 37,000 steps. And this day was really all about walking through the vineyards, which was really beautiful. And along the way, I got this little cone of cherries, which you can see here in this picture, and that was just a little bright spot in the day. And then on this page, I decided to put some of my packaging down from my blister plasters. I also got this tiger balm, which was to help kind of relieve your muscles, which I found Very nice, and I also had a few bug bites as well, and it works well on that too, so that was a great find at the pharmacy. And the one restaurant we went to had this placemat with these fake news articles about different types of food, and so I saved that and used it here in my journal to represent the fact that we went and got some burgers on this day. The next day we walked to La Faba, and this was 16 miles or 35,000 steps. This shell is also from a placemat, so always be looking for those types of freebies to use in your journaling. And then I did this little illustration of a highway because Joe, who led the trip, said that we were going to be walking in a valley this day. So I was picturing this beautiful valley like some of the previous days we had, and instead it was pretty much walking on this road, essentially a highway, all day. Technically, yes, the road was in a valley, but I wouldn't call it a valley hike. And so I just did a little bit of lettering to say, Joe, this is not the valley I was envisioning. This is a road. And then on this side, I did a little tip in of this postcard that I also got for free at the albergue where we stayed. It was a really neat spot that essentially had this church right on the property that you could sit in and do some reflective time. And then along the way, we stopped at this place, actually run by some Americans who moved to Spain to open this business as a pizza shop. And we got some churros con chocolate there as well that were very good. And then this photo down here is this gorgeous view of Villafranca as we were leaving that morning to walk to La Faba. This next day was another one of my favorites in which we officially crossed from León region into Galicia, and you can definitely see the difference in landscape as you cross into these regions. We were walking to Triacastella, and it was 18.84 miles or 42,000 plus steps, and so this was actually our longest day of walking, but it was also the most beautiful, so I didn't mind it as much as I would have thought. We walked through the Osobreiro region, and as you can see from the photos, every view was so beautiful. It was just the luscious valleys and vineyards and pastures stretching into the mountains, and we had an amazing experience. And then one fun thing that we came across was the statue of Santiago. There are statues of him all along the Camino, but in this case, it's hard to see in this photo, but many of the pilgrims decided to put bandages on Santiago's feet, and so his feet were just covered in plasters and band-aids, and I thought that was a very funny touch from all of the pilgrims who came before us. All right, this next page is one of my favorites in this journal because it was a very special experience that occurred on the 21st when we were walking to Sarria. This was a 13.5 mile walk, or about 30,000 steps, so not quite as long as some of our others. And on this day, you actually had two choices of the path that you could take. One of the options was a little out of the way and would take you through Samos, where you could go to a very old monastery. But I decided to go the other path, and at first I was regretting that decision. I was wondering if I was going to feel like I was missing out, not getting to see this monastery, but it turned out to be God's perfect gift to me because instead I came upon something that was a far more spiritual experience for me, and that was an art gallery. And that art gallery is owned by a man named Arthur, or Art, and he creates these beautiful artworks, as you can see here. I got many postcards from him. This is one that I sent to Ben. And on all of his artworks, he has John 14:6, which reads, "Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life." And this is his stamp here, as you can see, with the same verse. And one thing that Art does is when you buy a print from him, he offers to do an illustration in your credencial. Now, because I had my journal with me, I asked if instead of doing the artwork in my credential, if he instead wouldn't mind doing it in my journal. And he was so excited about the idea. I think he was looking forward to having a bigger canvas to work in. And so I handed over my journal, and within 2 minutes, he created this beautiful watercolor and oil pastel illustration of a hiker walking into the sunset and the trees. It's just this beautiful abstract illustration. I asked him to sign it, and then he put his giant stamp of his artwork next to it as well. And so this was so special, such a great experience getting to meet him and see inside his beautiful art studio and gallery. And it just was a huge highlight of my trip. And if you're interested, here is the print that I purchased. I can't quite fit it all into the screen, but as you can see, it is very similar. It's a hiker who's walking the Camino through the mountains, and it says, Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I just absolutely love the colors in this artwork, so I can't wait to hang that up in my home. And then this is another good example of just using some lettering to call out some highlights, like hanging out on the rooftop where I also did my laundry that day, having some churrasco for dinner, and a little cat nap. All of the students napped so often throughout this trip. As soon as we got to each albergue, they would take like 3-hour naps, and I very rarely napped, but that was one day where I did have a teeny little nap before dinner. And here is another example of Art's artwork. I love that one as well. And here you can see a photo of his desk and some of the beautiful paths that we took as we walked to Sarria. Now, Sarria is where you have to start if you want to officially call it the Camino and get a certificate saying that you did it, because you have to walk at least 100 kilometers, and that is essentially the 100-kilometer mark on this next day going to Porto Marine. So on this day I had 15 miles, or about 34,000 steps, and as you can see here, I said less than 100 kilometers left until Santiago. Another gorgeous piece from the washi tape shop. And then on the right, a very fun type of page that you can do is just capturing in illustrated form some of the little joys of the day. So on this day, tortilla was a little joy. This was a little joy every day. I literally said here, cada dia, every single day. I had tortilla, which is essentially like a crustless quiche with potato in it. It's very, very good. And then we saw some ocellated lizards, or jeweled lizards, which is the largest lizard in Europe, I learned, and is also endemic to the Iberian Peninsula, so you can only find it in that region. And I was so excited to see one cross my path. And then I also had a smoothie when I got to Porto Marine and sat outside in the sun, looking out over the river and doing some journaling and basically creating this illustration. So it was a really lovely way to spend my afternoon. And here you can see the collage of our time in Porto Marine, officially reaching the 100-kilometer marker, which was a very exciting moment. And then also a photo of the jeweled lizard, having some ice cream, my smoothie. We did go to another pilgrim's mass, and there also was a storm in the evening, and so my bunk bed, I was on the top bunk and I was right under the window, and so I got to kind of watch the rain fall and read. The next page is one that I left blank and actually created when I got home. So this is the only page, other than adding in all of the photos, that I did not do while in Spain. And this was a page that I had in mind to do, which was essentially my packing list, like an illustrated guide to everything that I brought with me and everything that I found to be most important to my travel, especially because this was the type of trip where you come to find what's important to you and you end up depending so much on these few supplies. It really was impactful to illustrate them and document them in this way, because they ultimately became so much a part of the actual trip and experience. So I have things like my wool tees and my sun hoodie, of course my darn tough wool socks, the shoes that I wore, my toiletries, my micro towel, blister bandages, of course. And where possible, I tried to add a little commentary as well, like I brought toe socks too, or the right shoes are everything, or the fact that I brought Vaseline. Everyone swears by the Vaseline trick. I get it now, because yes, if you're trying to prevent blisters, covering your feet in Vaseline or petroleum really does work wonders. So I highly recommend this page idea to document what you are bringing with you. Another idea would be to use this same idea to document your souvenirs and what you bring home, or you could do this to document the foods that you eat, the places you see, any highlights along that nature. The next day we had a very, very tiny bit of rain in the morning, but it was perfectly timed for when we stopped to get breakfast. So we actually didn't end up walking in rain at any point on this trip. It was truly the most beautiful weather essentially the entire time, so we were very fortunate. We went to a restaurant in the evening when we arrived in Palas de Rey, had a wine that is supposed to be popular for the region, and this is just a business card from the restaurant that I peeled off the back and then stuck it into my journal. The next day we walked to Ribadizo, and this was 17 miles or 36,000 steps, and this was the most charming little villa, our last one that we came across. It was literally like an albergue, a restaurant, and then this gorgeous old bridge stretching over this creek. And the whole day Joe kept talking about how lovely it was going to be to get to this creek and put our feet in the water. And when we arrived, it was the perfect sunny, hot day to do exactly that. And so I immediately took off my shoes and not only stuck my feet in the water, but basically sat my whole body in the water. And I was the only one to do so, apparently. But it was such a sweet moment. And I actually found this quote online that came up in my feed that day, and I thought it was very fitting about remembering the now and being present. And it says, "We are living in a culture hypnotized by the illusion of time. We have no present. Our consciousness is almost completely preoccupied with memory and expectation. We do not realize that there never was, is, nor will be any other experience than present experience." And that is a quote by Alan Waltz. And so I loved that idea, and I wanted to do this illustration of my experience in my journal. And so I did this at a cafe actually in Santiago to document sitting in the water and just having that moment in time of soaking in the sun. And then I have a collage over here of doing exactly that again, some photos sitting in the water. And then another highlight of this day was my breakfast, because I walked, I think, 9 miles this day before stopping for breakfast, which was my longest time of waiting before eating. And so I went all out when I finally did stop, and I had this amazing tostada with fresas and the strawberries, and also had a tostada con jamón and a café con leche, and I also had a smoothie that day, so it was very, very nice. The next day we walked to our final town before walking to Santiago, and this was a 15-mile experience or 33,000 steps. And the main highlight for this day was actually just having some ice cream. They use pistachio in a lot of things in Spain, I learned, and I love pistachio, and I especially enjoyed it as ice cream. And so I just documented that here in the journal. And then the next day was the day of walking to Santiago de Compostela. And so I did this fun little countdown video for Ben, because this was actually the 26th, our 7-year anniversary. And so when we got to the 7-kilometer mark, I did a little dance at each kilometer until we got to Santiago and the 0 marker to celebrate our 7 years of marriage. And I made it into a little video for him. If you're interested in what that looks like, I will stick it here for you to enjoy.
7 kilometers to go, celebrating 7 years of marriage.
So this was a very special experience, not only for having completed my 200-mile plus journey across Spain, but also because of the day that we arrived being my anniversary. And we got to see this beautiful cathedral that did not disappoint. When you arrive, there are all these bagpipes that are playing music as you're going through this tunnel, and it just is really a moment of feeling like we did it. It really is a celebratory experience. And so we walked in and had some time in front of the cathedral, just enjoying the fact that we made it and celebrating together, took some photos. And then later in that day, we went to the Pilgrim's Mass and got to see the Bota Fumero, which is essentially this giant hanging incense device that they swing through the cathedral to spread the incense. And I think I wrote here a little description of it. Famous thurible that is swung by 8 robed tiraboleros to pull the rope and send the incense through the air as an oration to God. And so I just documented that with a little illustration as well. We also had some pinchos, which are basically some like little bite-sized appetizers that you can have with your wine. We had some tinto verano, which is essentially red wine and lemonade mixed together. It's very refreshing. And then I did put in this little new strength card, which was from another church that we went to. And then I just have some photos of our final day of walking and arriving in Santiago, my feet in front of the cathedral. That is how I got there, one step at a time. And then I have 2 more blank pages that I filled with photos because I knew that this was really the moment that I wanted to be captured, with some large photos to represent it all. So I have me standing in front of the cathedral with my shell, our group photo, and of course holding up my completed credencial. And then the next day we had to explore Santiago on our own. And so I really enjoyed using this as a rest day to hang out in cafes, finish up my journaling, look at some books and explore. And then in the afternoon, we had a rooftop tour of the cathedral where you literally get to walk out on the roof, get to look out over the incredible town of Santiago and just see everything happening below with some incredible views. So that was a very special experience. We also went to a little seafood market and had some pulpo. I don't typically like to eat octopus, but when in Spain, it is very common. And so did try a little bit of that. It's not my favorite, but I did have a photo here because it's just so much octopus just sitting out on trays. And then I also have a photo of some of the pimientos de padros, which are these really good roasted peppers that I had as kind of my final delicacy of Spain that I had the opportunity to try before leaving. And then finally, the 28th, we said goodbye to Santiago and headed back to Madrid. And we had just one last day in Madrid where we primarily just hung out and went to dinner actually at the same place where we went for our first group dinner. And I got the exact same meal because it was so good the first time. And that was the end of the trip. And as you can see here, I have 2 more pages in my journal because since this was a group trip, I thought it would be very special to treat my last 2 pages as a bit of a yearbook and have everybody who I traveled with sign the book. And so I have little notes from all of the students that I traveled with and the other staff members here in my journal. And so that is just a very special thing to be able to look back on. And is actually something I would recommend to you if you're traveling with family or a friend, or even if you're traveling alone and just meeting some people along the way, asking them if you get to know them well and feel comfortable doing so, to write a little note in your journal. It can be such a powerful keepsake to remember not only the places you visited, but the people you met along the way. And then on the back page of the journal, I did tip in this teeny little story that I bought for I think €2. So it's Cuentos del Camino de Santiago, where they just have these little stories, and it's called The Owl and the Traveling Child. And I decided to get it in English so that I could read it to you. And it says, Lucas and his friend, the owl, decided to explore the world. They packed their belongings into a backpack and began their journey on the Camino de Santiago. One day, they encountered an elderly pilgrim carrying a very light backpack. How is it possible that you carry so little? Lucas asked. The old man smiled and replied, Along the way, I realized that I didn't need so much. I've been leaving the unnecessary behind. Lucas decided to do the same. Gradually, he let go of things he didn't really need. Each time he let something go, he felt lighter, not just physically, but emotionally as well. He learned that to move forward in life, sometimes it's necessary to let go of what no longer serves us. So I thought that was a very fitting story to close out my journal and close out the lessons that I learned along the Camino de Santiago. This really was such a fantastic trip, really another once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I've been so blessed in my life with so many experiences that I can call once-in-a-lifetime, truly incredible trips and people and places. It's a real gift and I do not take it for granted. So I hope that you enjoyed getting to travel along the Camino with me through the eyes of my travel journal. I hope that it gave you some ideas and tips for how you can document your own incredible travels and experiences, whether those take you abroad or just nearby home. No matter where life takes you, it is worth documenting, and I hope you will do so. If you need some more ideas on how to document your life, I hope that you'll subscribe and join our community here on YouTube and of course on Patreon. Thank you to all of my patrons who make this possible. Again, if you're interested in the Travel Diaries sticker kit, you can find that over on my Patreon. And if you're interested in how I've documented some of my other travels, then I would encourage you to check out this playlist next for even more travel journal flip-throughs, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.